This hearing just exposed something most Americans never see, how investigations really work, and why some leaders are warning the system itself is being damaged.
Ranking Member Whitehouse.
Just to follow up on that point, Mr. O'Leary, is the reason that a prosecutor would pursue a non-disclosure order for a toll record subpoena necessarily that it is the subject of the subpoena who would attempt to interfere with or obstruct the investigation, as opposed to the subject of the investigation who would attempt to interfere with and obstruct the investigation?
Senator, it depends on the investigation. It could be the subject of the investigation. It could be associates. The idea of a non-disclosure order is to not really let an individual know that they're under investigation.
But one cannot infer from the existence of a non-disclosure order any accusation that the subject of the order was intending to interfere or obstruct. It could just as easily be that it was actually the subject of the investigation, one of the conspirators, for instance, who the court was concerned about, who the prosecutor was concerned about.
It certainly could be, but as I was communicating to Senator Cruz, non-disclosure orders are a routine part of FBI investigations.
Understood. So in your view, what has happened to the FBI and DOJ's national security capabilities in the last 15 months?
They've been decimated. There's been generational damage done.
And with respect to the quiet bastion you referred to, and the standards of virtue and integrity that you spoke so passionately about, were those standards of virtue and integrity, the fidelity, bravery, and integrity of the FBI, met by agents who Kash Patel then turned on and fired?
There is rampant morale, degradation, uncertainty amongst the ranks, and really disheartened career federal public servants who've been dismissed without cause. And
because, in fact, their colleagues understood that they, in fact, met those standards for fidelity, bravery, and integrity, and were nevertheless fired, correct?
Correct.
DOJ and the FBI run under close institutional checks and balances designed to protect the integrity of the organization. Were those applicable to special counsel?
I would assume so. I wasn't involved in that investigation at all, but I can speak to the process that Washington Field Office would follow, and those are the agents that supported that investigation.
And they would follow traditional, regular FBI guidelines?
The documents that I was able to review demonstrated that.
Are you aware that the Trump Department of Justice in the first term subpoenaed information from members of Congress and members of Congress's staff, including toll records?
Senator, the FBI conducting public corruption investigations has been part of its mission for years. I know it's probably disconcerting to any member of Congress or public official, but the FBI does it with the same integrity that it conducts any investigation. I would say to a fellow Irishman, we would probably work with them on an investigation, but the FBI pursues these despite what side of the aisle you're on.
And they did in the first Trump term of office, and that included getting non-disclosure orders so that the members of Congress did not know their toll records had been subpoenaed, correct?
That is correct. It's routine.
Tell me a little bit, as we wrap up here, about the work of the CI-12 unit and what condition it is now in as hostilities with Iran exist.
So CI-12 is a foreign counterintelligence squad in Washington Field Office, and the agents that were dismissed from there and from the counterintelligence division at FBI headquarters work a variety of counterintelligence priorities. Iran is one of them, and dismissing some of these people just days before the war with Iran kicked off creates problems with sustained focus and could impact operations.
And in fact, some of the FBI's institutional knowledge is contained in the knowledge and experience of senior FBI agents. And so when they are purged for political reasons, that component of the Bureau loses something fairly significant.
That is true, Senator. So there were some senior leaders at headquarters that were removed. And then in this last year alone, 2 assistant directors from Washington field office were both removed.
My time is up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Without objection, I'd like to introduce.
With respect to the question of the NDOs and the reason for that, I'd like to put into the record the letter that I wrote to Speaker Johnson, giving what I consider to be the accurate background related to that, dated January 15, 2026.
Without objection, will be entered into the record.
Thank you.
Also, without objection, I want to introduce into the record a November 2nd, 2023 letter from Chairman Grassley to the DOJ Office of Inspector General, raising concerns that in 2017, DOJ subpoenaed personal phone and email records of Republicans and Democrat congressional staff. I'm also entering into the record a November 8th, 2023 letter from me, Chairman Grassley, and Senator Lee to Attorney General Garland, raising similar concerns and requesting information on the subpoenas of congressional staff. Contrary to what Senator Whitehouse said in his opening, Republicans did raise concerns about the DOJ obtaining records from congressional staff of both parties. And I will say, just a minute ago, Mr. O'Leary, you were being asked by Senator Whitehouse about investigating members of Congress, and it is certainly true that DOJ has a long tradition if there's evidence of particular misconduct. For example, our former colleague, Senator Menendez, is currently incarcerated in prison for corruption. And if you've got evidence of criminal conduct of one individual, the Department of Justice has an obligation to investigate that. Would you agree that's qualitatively different than a fishing expedition targeting 20% of the Republicans in the Senate? Would you agree that's qualitatively different?
I'm not familiar with the details of either investigation, so I wouldn't want to speculate.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you be troubled if tomorrow the Trump Department of Justice issued a subpoena for the phone records of every Democrat that sits on the Judiciary Committee?
Not if it was based on factual evidence, specific and articulable facts.
Well, let me be clear. I'd be damn troubled. And that would be an abuse of power. And I'm going to predict not a single Democrat's going to say even a word about the abuse of power on their side. And that double standard is troubling. Senator Lee.
What you just watched may not sound explosive at first, but if you really understand what's being discussed, it's one of the most important conversations about the justice system happening right now. Because this isn't about one case. It's about how investigations are conducted, who gets targeted, and whether the institutions we rely on for justice are being protected or quietly weakened. Let's start with the concept that came up early: non-disclosure orders. That might sound technical, but it's actually critical. These orders are used so that people under investigation don't know they're being investigated. And that's not about secrecy for secrecy's sake. It's about preventing interference. If someone knows they're being watched, they could destroy evidence, coordinate stories, or obstruct justice. So when Democrats walk through this, they're doing something important. They're clarifying that these tools are routine, lawful, and used across administrations. That matters because there's often an attempt to frame these actions as unusual or politically motivated, when in reality, they're part of standard investigative procedure. But then the conversation shifts, and this is where it gets serious. You hear a stark warning that the FBI and Department of Justice have been decimated, that there's been generational damage. That's not casual language. That's a former insider describing a system where morale is collapsing, experienced professionals are being pushed out, and institutional knowledge is being lost. And that last part is key. Because when we talk about law enforcement at this level, we're not just talking about jobs. We're talking about expertise built over decades. Counterintelligence agents who understand foreign threats. Investigators who know how to track complex networks. People who can recognize patterns that others would miss. When those individuals are removed, especially if it's perceived to be for political reasons, you don't just lose personnel, you lose capability. That's exactly why Democrats are pressing this issue, because national security isn't just about weapons or budgets, it's about people. It's about having the right expertise in place when it matters most. And notice the timing that's raised. The idea that key counterintelligence personnel were dismissed just as tensions with countries like Iran are escalating. That's not framed as coincidence, it's framed as risk. Because in moments of global instability, you need your most experienced people in place, not walking out the door. Then there's another layer to this discussion: investigations involving members of Congress. Now, this is where things can get politically charged very quickly. But the important point Democrats are making is about consistency and integrity. The FBI has long had the authority to investigate public corruption on both sides of the aisle. That's not new. That's part of its mission. What matters is how that power is used. Is it based on evidence? Is it targeted and specific? Or does it become broad, unfocused, and potentially political? That distinction is everything, because the legitimacy of the justice system depends on the public believing that investigations are driven by facts, not by politics. And this is where the tension in the hearing really comes into focus. On one side, there's concern about potential overreach, about investigations that could be seen as too broad. On the other side, there's a defense of the tools and processes that have always existed to hold power accountable. Democrats are trying to walk that line carefully, defending the integrity of the system while also raising alarms about actions that could undermine it. Because here's the bottom line. Once trust in institutions like the FBI and DOJ starts to erode, it doesn't just affect Washington. It affects everything. It affects whether people believe in the rule of law, whether they trust investigations, whether they feel justice is applied fairly. And rebuilding that trust, once it's lost, is incredibly difficult. So when you watch this exchange, don't just hear policy talk or legal jargon. Hear what's really being debated: the future of the institutions that are supposed to protect democracy itself. That's why Democrats continue to push for accountability, transparency, and the protection of these institutions from political interference. Because without that, the system doesn't just weaken, it risks breaking. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we go beyond the surface and actually help you understand how power and accountability really work, subscribe to Blue Voice, like this video, and share it with someone who needs clarity, not confusion. Because in a democracy, understanding the system is the first step to protecting it.